Imagine you are standing right at the base of this colossal, multi-billion-dollar concrete dam.
Oh, I love this visual.
Right. So you look up, and the sheer scale of it is just breathtaking. And the authorities, like the top-tier financial engineers of the world, they're all standing right next to you.
Pointing at the structure, telling you how great it is.
Exactly. They swear to you that it is an absolute masterpiece. They're like, this is designed to completely and flawlessly control the floodwaters of the entire global economy.
And the promise they give you is super simple, right? When the economy gets too hot, the dam holds the water back.
Yeah. And then when a drought hits and the market freezes up, they just release this steady, life-saving stream. You look at the concrete and you feel totally safe.
But then you look down.
Yeah, you happen to glance down at your boots. And right there, built into the base of this impenetrable wall, is a massive, gaping, rusted pipe.
Just spewing water.
Violently spewing water right past the dam, just completely bypassing all that billion-dollar engineering. So, okay, let's unpack this.
We really need to. Because that image of the rusted pipe, it captures the reality of our global financial system better than basically any academic model I've ever seen.
Which is crazy to think about.
It is. Because when we discuss macroprudential regulation, the rules meant to keep banks from collapsing, we are usually presented with this illusion of absolute control.
Right, like the laws are written in Geneva or Washington, and they have these massive compliance departments.
Exactly. Thousands of people, the dam is theoretically sealed. But the water, which in this case is capital, it has a primal instinct. It always, always finds the crack.
And exploring that crack is literally our mission for this deep dive. Because if you are listening to this, you probably follow the markets. You know the basic narratives around bank regulation.
But today we are looking at research that just completely slaps those narratives in the face.
Oh, totally. We have this stack of incredibly revealing research. Specifically, we are tearing into a National Bureau of Economic Research working paper by Shekhar Aiyar, Charles Calomiris, and Tomasz Wieladek.
And we aren't just talking about abstract theory here. This is a literal God's eye view experiment.
Yeah, a 10-year sandbox experiment in banking regulation. It proves how the most well-intentioned financial red lines, the ones designed to cool down an overheating economy, they might actually be opening the back door for extreme risk.
Yeah, the data shows that the very regulations meant to tame capital actually caused a massive leakage. Like almost a third of the policy effect just leaked out.
29.4% leakage, to be exact. A leak that essentially defeated the regulators at their own game.
And what's fascinating here is the nature of the data itself. Because, studying regulation usually involves just a massive amount of guesswork.
Right, because the economy is so noisy.
Exactly. You look at a sprawling, interconnected global economy, a new rule is implemented, and then 10 years later, economists are still arguing over whether that specific rule actually prevented a crisis or if it was just pure coincidence.
It's so hard to isolate variables.
It's nearly impossible. But this source gives us something so rare. It's a 10-year real-world, perfectly isolated sandbox experiment.
In the UK, right.
Yes. The researchers got access to the United Kingdom's Financial Services Authority, the FSA, and their proprietary confidential regulatory database from 1998 all the way to 2007.
Wow. So they get to look under the hood.
Right. You might think regulators have perfect control over banks.
Yeah.
You might assume when a central bank pulls a lever, the machine responds exactly like the textbook says.
But the data from this UK sandbox just totally exposes that. It exposes the absolute iron laws of capital arbitrage. I want to dig right into that phrase, actually, because the iron laws of capital arbitrage sounds so aggressive, it's like anti-common sense.
It really is.
Because if you look at the whole framework of modern banking regulation, like Basel III, it is all built on this elegant-sounding concept called countercyclical buffers.
Which sounds great in a press release.
Right. In plain English, regulators tell banks, hey, when times are good and the economy is booming, force yourselves to hoard cash.
Build a fortress.
Yeah, build a capital fortress. And then when a crisis hits, we will lower those requirements. You release the cash, lend to businesses, and save the economy.
Boom. Bust. Smoothed out.
Perfect machine, right. But I have to push back here. Does this brilliantly elegant theory actually save the real economy?
Well, no. It is basically the ultimate illusion of prudence.
An illusion?
Yeah, to understand why it's an illusion, We have to look at the mechanism. A regulator sees the economy overheating.
Yeah.
Credit is too cheap, maybe a real estate bubble is forming, so they hit the brakes.
They tell banks to hold more capital.
Exactly. You must hold more equity against your risky assets.
Yeah.
The whole idea relies on a direct chain of cause and effect. Force the bank to hold more capital, and you restrict their supply of credit.
Right. You introduce friction. You starve the overheating engine of fuel.
That is the goal. But the core conflict here, the absolute fatal flaw in this trillion-dollar framework, is that it relies on one massive assumption. It assumes that when those highly regulated banks cut back on lending, no one else steps in to fill the void.
Oh, wow. Wait. So it's like a city council trying to stop public intoxication by forcing all the licensed bars to close at 10 p.m.
Yes.
But they completely ignore the dozens of unlicensed speakeasies operating in the alleys right behind the bars.
That is the perfect analogy. If unregulated channels, meaning other financial institutions that don't answer to those specific rules, just step in and replace the restricted credit, then the whole policy is a hallucination.
It's basically a trillion-dollar placebo.
Exactly. The economy doesn't cool down, the credit just changes hands and migrates into the shadows.
Which brings up a serious emotional dilemma for me. If this massive defense line is guaranteed to have a gaping hole, who are we actually protecting with all these rules?
Well, the researchers show that for the regulator's dam to actually hold water, 3 microeconomic iron laws must hold true.
Okay, let's go through these gears, because if one breaks, the whole thing is scrap paper.
100%. So the first iron law is the hitter cost of equity.
And reading this part of the paper felt like learning a magic trick. It completely subverts common sense.
Oh, it really does.
Because if a regulator tells a bank tomorrow, hey, increase your capital ratio by 1%, you'd think the bank would just issue a few more shares of stock, raise some cash, and put it in the vault.
Boom. Compliant.
Right. So why is their first instinct to mercilessly cut loans to local businesses instead of just selling stock?
Because of a concept called asymmetric information. But let's avoid the jargon. Think of it like a real-world transaction. If I knock on your door tomorrow, completely out of the blue, and offer to sell you my car for cash on the spot, what do you think?
I am immediately suspicious. I'm thinking, what's wrong with the transmission? You know something I don't. It's a lemon.
Exactly. Your reaction is identical to how the stock market reacts to a bank trying to raise capital. If a bank suddenly announces they are issuing new stock, investors instantly think, wait, what are they hiding?
Are their loans defaulting? Are they facing huge write-offs?
Right. Because the bank has private info, any sudden move to raise cash is seen as a distress signal. The market punishes the stock price. And when you add in the multi-million-dollar fees that Wall Street charges to underwrite that stock,
It becomes incredibly toxic. So issuing stock is basically off the table.
it's way too expensive.
So they have to use what I call the denominator trick. This is a massive... Wait, what moment?
Oh, the math trick. Breakdown.
Okay, so the paper shows that a bank's capital ratio is just a simple fraction. The numerator on top is the actual capital, the equity. The denominator on the bottom is their risk-weighted assets, which is mostly just their loans.
Right, loans to the real economy.
Exactly. So to satisfy the regulator and make that percentage bigger, you have two choices. Increase the numerator, which we just established is toxic and expensive.
Yep, the lemon car.
Or the path of least resistance. You just ruthlessly chop away at the denominator.
You shrink the bottom number.
You don't inject a single penny of new capital. You just stop lending. You cut off the local bakery, the construction company. You choke the real economy just to make your spreadsheet look compliant.
It is pure mathematical compliance achieved by breaking bones in the real world. The bank shrinks its footprint. And that leads directly into the second iron law.
The mask of excess capital, or the buffer paradox.
Yes, this is where the paper really turns conventional wisdom upside down.
Because a lot of people think, oh, the regulator requires 8%, but the bank holds 12%. They have a 4% safety buffer, so the regulation isn't forcing them to do anything.
Right, people think it's just idle cash. But the source data completely dismantles that. The buffer is actually a deeply ingrained psychological safety net.
Because banks operate in a world of high-frequency shocks, right?
Exactly. A corporate borrower goes bankrupt, or interest rates swing wildly. If a bank dips below that minimum red line for even a single day, the consequences are catastrophic.
Regulators swarm the building, executives get fired.
Dividends are frozen. The stock plummets. They maintain that wide buffer because they are terrified of touching the electrified fence of the minimum requirement.
It's like driving a heavy truck on a cliffside highway. The regulatory minimum is the edge of the cliff. I'm driving 10 feet away from the edge.
And you feel safe there?
Right. But if the government moves the painted line 5 feet closer to my truck, I'm not going to just shrug and drive closer to the edge. I'm going to swerve to maintain my 10-foot psychological safety distance.
And the data bears that out flawlessly. When the regulatory red line moves up, the bank's actual capital moves up in exact parallel lockstep.
That constraint is absolute steel.
Yes. But the truly shocking finding here, the weak link that defies all logic, is how different banks react. You'd assume the weakest banks, the ones driving mere inches from the cliff, would panic the most.
Right, because they are closest to failing.
But the researchers found the exact opposite. The safest banks, the ones with the highest, most luxurious buffers, react the most violently.
Wait, really? The safe ones?
Yes. When the regulator tightens the screws, these ultra-conservative banks slash their lending the most aggressively because their entire culture is built around being terrified of losing that wide margin.
They value their distance from the cliff so much that they will happily crush local businesses to maintain it.
Exactly. They break bones to stay in their comfort zone. Which brings us to the third iron law, the soft information moat.
Because if you're a business owner listening to this, you might ask, why don't I just walk down the street to a giant foreign bank? Or issue corporate bonds?
Standardized bonds are for tech giants and massive pharmaceutical companies. They have audited statements and global credit ratings. But a local manufacturing plant relies on soft information.
Like the local banker knowing the CEO's character.
Exactly. The local banker knows the quirks of their supply chain, unquantifiable realities. This soft information binds the borrower to the local bank.
It's a moat.
A huge moat. If that business walks into a foreign megabank, the algorithm just rejects them. So when their local bank cuts them off, they're truly stranded.
So we have these three iron laws. Equity is too expensive, the safety buffer makes the safest banks panic, and local businesses are trapped by soft information.
Yep. All three lock the system into place.
Which means the regulator in London has this terrifying power to crush local lending. Let's look at this UK sandbox from 1998 to 2007. London was basically running a God mode experiment.
They were doing something entirely unique. Long before Basel III, the UK's FSA was actively shifting capital requirements using a system called trigger ratios.
And this wasn't public, right?
No, completely confidential. The FSA would evaluate an individual bank, look at their specific risks, and privately send a letter to the board dictating a customized minimum capital ratio.
Which creates a scenario of shocking inequality. Two banks on the exact same street doing the same business, but the regulator privately forces one to hold nearly 3 times as much capital.
The hard numbers are wild. The baseline was 8%, but in the UK, these customized requirements ranged wildly up to 23%.
23%.
With a standard deviation of 2.26%. It was targeted sniper fire based on a bank's specific risks.
Operating with a 23% requirement is like running a marathon with an anvil tied to your back while your competitor sprints at 8%.
Oh, absolutely.
But did the FSA even have an official mandate to control the whole macroeconomy?
That's the profound irony. If we connect this to the bigger picture, they had absolutely no mandate to smooth out the business cycle. Their only job was to make sure individual banks didn't go bankrupt.
But they ended up acting like a macro manager anyway.
Totally driven by regulatory instinct. The data shows a 0.64 correlation between national GDP growth and these capital requirements.
That is a massive correlation.
It is. When the UK economy boomed, the regulators naturally cranked up the pressure. When it slowed down, they relaxed. They were executing perfect counter-cyclical policy without even realizing it.
So they were the perfect lab rats, which means we can look at the brutal reality of enforcement. When the regulator turns the dial just 1 percentage point, what exactly happens to the real world?
The evaporation of credit is instantaneous. The researchers found that a mere 100 basis point increase, just 1%, causes regulated banks to slash lending by 6.5 to 7.2%.
A 1% dial turn causes a 7% amputation in local lending. That is brutal.
It is instantaneous break-a-bone-to-survive behavior. The local businesses take the hit so the bank can stay compliant.
But wait, I have to play the skeptic here, because maybe these banks were just making terrible loans, taking huge losses, and that's why they stopped lending.
The bad debt theory.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't the regulator, maybe it was just self-preservation because of bad debt.
The researchers actually spent a huge portion of the paper proving this lie completely false. They ran complex regressions and proved that capital requirement changes were completely orthogonal to loan write-offs.
Okay, orthogonal. Let's be clear. That means they have absolutely zero mathematical relationship, right?
Exactly. Unrelated. The regulatory changes had nothing to do with current, past, or future write-offs. The credit contraction was a pure, direct result of the regulator's invisible hand squeezing the bank's throat.
Okay, so the regulator squeezes the bank starves the economy, the dam is working, but we have to talk about the chimney thieves.
The chimney thieves, I love this.
Because you lock your front door, you deadbolt the windows, but you forgot to check the chimney, and your neighbor is currently using it to carry out your flat-screen TV. Where is the leak in this financial system?
To find the leak, you have to look at who wasn't getting those private letters from the FSA. The massive blind spot was the 173 foreign branches operating inside the UK.
Like American banks, German banks.
Right, sitting right there in London, lending to British companies.
But they didn't have to follow the British rules.
No, because of international financial law. A branch is just an extension of the parent bank back home. So they weren't subject to the FSA's dynamic rules.
Yeah.
They only answered to their home countries.
And their home countries were just keeping a flat 8% rule.
Exactly. No dynamic dials, no countercyclical pressure.
So the UK regulator is squeezing British banks to hold 15 or 20% capital, and literally across the street, a German branch is chilling at 8%.
It handed them a massive competitive advantage. And this is where we see the sheer aggression of capital arbitrage. When the local UK bank shrinks its lending by 1%, the unregulated foreign branch doesn't just casually step in.
They don't just pick up the slack to be polite.
Far from it. They experience a revenge-like expansion. The substitution rate is crazy. For every 1% the domestic bank retreats, the foreign branch explodes its lending by 2.67 times.
2.67. That is a hostile takeover. The domestic bank takes one step back, the foreign branch sprints 3 steps forward.
It's incredibly predatory. In some key industries, these unregulated branches swooped in and took over 40% of the market share. They have a primal instinct to ruthlessly hunt down regulatory voids.
So the FSA is patting themselves on the back, thinking they're cooling the economy, and meanwhile, the foreign branches are throwing a massive unregulated credit party.
Exactly.
But if the branches are expanding at 2.67 times, did the total credit actually go up?
Well, individually, these foreign branches were much smaller than massive legacy banks like Barclays, so they were growing off a smaller baseline.
So a Chihuahua multiplying its size by 3 is still smaller than a Great Dane taking a step back.
Great way to visualize it. But there were 173 of them acting as a swarm. So the final net effect on the regulator's attempt to cool the economy is the big reveal here.
The ultimate cost of the rusted pipe.
Yes. Because of this one-sided regulation, exactly 29.4% of the entire macroeconomic cooling effect quietly leaked out of the system.
Nearly 1/3.
Yeah, the dam fundamentally failed. You squeeze out 100 gallons of credit, and 30 gallons spew right back into the rusted pipe.
That is a spectacular failure. You break the bones of your own domestic banks, hurt your own local businesses, and 1/3 of the benefit just evaporates into foreign profit margins.
It's wild.
Right.
And this UK experiment proved to the world that unilateral regulation is suicide.
Which led to a massive fix. Right?
Yes, it led directly to the reciprocity principle in Basel III. Home and host countries now have to legally match each other's regulations to weld that leak shut.
They're trying to build the dam across all borders simultaneously. But this brings me to a final, really provocative thought for you listening. Look at the world today. We live in an era of hyperliquid, borderless capital.
It moves at the speed of light now.
Exactly. Based strictly on this paper's warning about unregulated intermediaries, are we just repeating history right now?
It is the critical question, because Basel III fixed the loophole for physical foreign branches. But what about the vast universe of everything else?
Yes, all the unregulated shadow banking systems, private credit funds, leveraged hedge funds, DeFi protocols, they are the new chimney thieves.
They absolutely are. They don't fall under Basel III.
So if a regulator today tries to build a thicker dam on traditional banks, are they just creating a more violent flood of money into the shadows? Every time we reinforce the dam, are we just choosing where the water will break through?
The sandbox provides a clear warning. The free market's instinct to bypass constraints is always faster than a regulator's ability to enforce them. Capital will inevitably flow to the dark spaces.
It is profoundly sobering. We can build the biggest concrete walls in history, but in the world of capital, water always finds a crack.